Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to PanIIT Global e-Conclave on Nation Rebuilding. To open the conclave, please welcome Hari Padmanabhan, Chairman PanIIT Alumni Reach for India. Hari is a parallel entrepreneur, mentor, and early-stage investor. He is co-founder and chairman PanIIT Reach for India Foundation, set up with like-minded alumni in 2009 to champion nation-building initiatives across the country.
Good evening to all of you joining from India, and good day to others joining from different time zones to this PanIIT Alumni Global e-Conclave on Nation Rebuilding. It's really wonderful for me to have you all here today, and it is really your conclave. It is your support and participation over the next 3 weekends that will determine the success and effectiveness of this conclave we have put together in a rather short period, only possible under the current circumstances. I also trust that this inspires many, or at least some of you, to make a career, particularly the younger alumni, to make a career in doing good while you do well. PanIIT Alumni Reach for India Foundation and its joint venture with the government of Jharkhand called Praja, over the last 10 years, has created a model that is one of collaboration across multiple sectors. This impacts the weakest section of society by empowering underprivileged youth, not just with the skills needed to make a career, but also the assured jobs that from in established organizations that can really provide them a long-term employment. This while providing the means as well through a skill loan that ensures that their economic situation is not a barrier to benefiting from this unique program. The government, on the other hand, and business and industry as well, are also key stakeholders in this structure. The government, with equity in the private-public partnership, extends not only infrastructure and financial support, but also brings board-level governance and opens up new avenues for us. We will talk more about this in the next session. One of the recent avenues that they opened up for us was by asking us to set up COVID testing labs in Jharkhand, and I'm very happy to announce that the first one has gone live just about last week, and many are under a very advanced stage of completion. All our infrastructure, whatever we created for any of our training institutes or the COVID labs, are world-class, and we have closely worked with the Office of the Principal Scientific Advisor to the Government of India in putting this COVID testing lab together. The corporate sector, or Bazaar, not only provides long-term employment to our trainees, but also bridges the viability gap through funding. National institutions such as NABARD and NSDC, the National Skill Development Corporation, are also part of the entire ecosystem in terms of providing either financial support on a one-time basis initially, or an ongoing basis by funding our skill loans. The foundation now fully geared to scale this model across the country and is engaged with many states such as Odisha, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh, and Chhattisgarh. Hence, the coming together of Samaj, Sarkar, Bazaar in a collaborative partnership has been the key to our success. And the idea of this conclave was conceived on the basis of sharing this experience of bringing together these three supposedly diverse sectors of the economy, and how the coming together has provided a scalable model in the social sector, impacting the weakest section of society. So this conclave over the next 3 weekends aims to bring together leaders across multiple sectors of the economy, across skills and livelihood, agriculture, industry, education, healthcare, as well as being focused on skills, MSME, startups, and very significantly, gender empowerment. We sincerely trust that the sharing of our experience in multiple sectors of collaboration and the thought leadership that comes from the distinguished speakers across these sectors will enable the creation of a comprehensive framework that will be a systemic response to nation rebuilding that the country is engaged in the aftermath of the pandemic we currently experience. Considering that the challenge today is not from an external source or the more familiar historical sources of such situations, but from a rather mysterious virus, I think it's most appropriate that we have the principal scientific advisor to the Government of India, Dr. Vijay, who will inaugurate the session as we go forward to the next one. And the host of the session, I'm a great pleasure introducing Professor Satish Agnihotri. Professor Satish Agnihotri heads the Center for Technology Advancement in Rural Areas, Chithara, in IIT Bombay. He's a IIT alum with an MTech from IIT Bombay and is an IAS officer who retired as cabinet secretary and been a secretary in multiple ministries such as defense acquisition, energy, and also been DGF shipping. He has a master's in rural development and a PhD in gender from Norwich in the UK, and his work has been cited by very eminent personalities such as Amartya Sen, Ashish Bose, and Barbara Harris. Over to you, Professor Agnihotri.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that rather generous introduction. I think one of the reasons of me being the host here is probably being from the IIT system. IIT Mumbai happens to be my alma mater. And after my retirement as secretary coordination in the cabinet secretariat, I wasn't quite the cabinet secretary, but I was in the cabinet secretariat. I came back to my alma mater, and I have been teaching here since. I think it's my great pleasure to have with us Professor Vijay Raghavan, the PSA, the Principal Scientific Advisor. He is also from IIT system, knows the system quite well and doesn't need an introduction. We have had opportunities to interact in the past. Not just he's from the IIT system, he was also Secretary Biotechnology. He also held charge of Secretary Science and Technology Department. This becomes important because right now he's in a position where it's like, the head of the tetrahedron. So he's in a position to coordinate areas which he erstwhile had administered, interacted, and knows them fairly deeply. So in a way, he's in a very suitable position to bring synergy into this whole exercise. And he will enlighten us. PSA's office has taken a number of initiatives, and that's just as well because today we are looking at the need for bringing inputs from science and technology for this crisis that one is facing. I mean, Hari used the term post-pandemic. That post part has not firmly come in. We are into it, and of course we'll ride it over. But currently the situation looks like it's not a 2020 match. It's not even a one-day cricket. Well, I would even say it's not even a test match, but we are in for a test series. And during such time, it's a very comforting thought that we have among the thought leaders, someone like Professor Vijay Raghavan, the PSA to the Government of India. And for PanIITians, it also means we can bounce our ideas off him, we can nudge him, we can bother him, we can exasperate him, and which being from the IIT system, he very happily accepts and he picks up. I mean, he has that what is called, if you permit me, Professor Vijayaraghavan, he has that Nirkshir Vivek. So he listens to our chaff also, but he also picks up the grains and then takes them forward. So I think without much ado, I will welcome Professor Vijayaraghavan and first ask him how does he see this this very onerous responsibility of infusing, I think, inputs from science and technology, both in the current crisis and the aftermath that we are going to handle, as I said, in a test series. So, over to Professor Vijayaraghavan.
Yeah, thank you very much, Satish, and thank you very much, Hari, for organizing this and having me here. It's a pleasure to be amongst fellow alumni. My years at Kanpur are memorable, and the friendships we made there has stayed a lifetime, and also the friendships amongst all the other colleagues here. Now, very interestingly, Satish asked, how does one get science and technology into various aspects of our life and decision making? But the fact is that over 4 industrial revolutions, science has permeated every part of our lives and technology. But the problem is that that has not been matched by an understanding of science and technology. Indeed, the understanding of science has, perhaps amongst people in general, has become more distant, and technology has become even more incomprehensible. When people like me were growing up, if you opened up a watch or a car, you could in some ways figure out what was going on. You could actually open up, break up the components, compare them to what you saw in books or what someone told you, and understand the functioning of the most complex technological offerings. Today, if you open up the or electronic watch, lay people will have no idea what is inside. So yet they use that all the times. So people will use a iPhone, take an Airbus, and go to a protest against the evils of technology. And this distancing of people from all components is a very real that distancing is even more enhanced by the use of big data and artificial intelligence. And therefore, we have a big challenge now to communicate better science and technology to everyone if they have to be empowered. That is a big challenge, and that's feasible. And if we have time, we'll come to that a little later.
Yeah, I think somewhere probably you are saying that the demystification of the new or the advanced science and technology is perhaps again needed. But we will touch upon it if we have the time. But I think to begin with, let us see this current scenario where I think not just your office, but the scientific departments in the government of India and the educational institutes of higher learning in general, have to grapple with this issue of how to cope with the mysterious virus, as Hari called it, and how do we bring that relief, if I may say, in some senses, to the population in the immediate future, while we may be talking of vaccine, etc., that may be a much distant issue. So even something as mundane as low-cost sanitizer, how do you handle situations where soap may be available, water may not be adequately available, masks, the PPE, I mean, that is on the equipment side. and bringing back on the front burner the preventive measures, particularly in health and sanitation. How does your office see that? Because I think that role of coordination, I think that is very important. I mean, I see three silos. One is the overarching coordination part of it. Other is the health and sanitation side of it. And the third, which we will talk about later, will be the economy side of it. But if you could tell our audience about the initiatives that are already being taken, and there's an impressive list of initiatives that have been taken by your office and by the other scientific departments.
Hello. Yes. Thank you. That is very important, Satish. You are pointing out that, given the complexities of the virus, the importance of coordination and the effectiveness of various measures being taken. And indeed, that's most important. This was highlighted actually some years ago when the Prime Minister was addressing entering officers to the civil service and said that supposing the goal of the government is to plant a sapling, and there's a department of digging a hole, there's a department of putting the sapling in the hole, and a department of filling the hole again with dirt. If these three departments do their work, someone digs a hole, the planting is somewhere else, and the filling of a hole is somewhere else. Every department may have done its full job, but you haven't accomplished the outcome. Therefore, coordination is very, very important. And this coordination is even more important in complex matters which involves multiple specialities of science and technology, and even further important at a time like this. So this is one aspect to keep in mind. Synergy is important, and there's a very strong coordination mechanisms going on now, which interestingly, because there's a crisis, people have risen to the occasion and are coordinating much, much better than ever before. So that's on the very strong and positive side. Now, about the virus itself, we must remember that while this particular pandemic touches our lives, there have been no shortage of pandemics earlier. There has been the 1918 flu pandemic before. There's been another pandemic, the plague, the Great Plague earlier in the 19th century. Then there has been the Ebola epidemic, which nearly became a pandemic. And the influenza pandemic goes on every year. So this kind of a pandemic, a zoonotic jump, a spillover from bats to humans, has been studied really well. It was studied most recently in the SARS coronavirus 1 a few years ago, almost I think 8-9 years ago. And such spillovers account for a very large, about 60% of human disease. So this is not new. This has been, warned and talked about by several people over the last decades or two. I'm a member of a body called a Global Preparedness Monitoring Board. We warned about a respiratory pathogen in 2019. So these warnings are there. But fundamentally, in an economy-driven world where profits and bottom lines matter, there is a tendency not to invest in a seat belt. The argument is that, well, I'm driving perfectly fine without a seat belt. Why do I need it? And the seat belt in this case is monitoring virus spread in virology, research in ecology, research in environmental sciences, public health, and so on. Now this is a wake-up call for us to coordinate that, bring that seatbelt on board. But that can happen only if you factor in the economic cost of what you're buying now. Must be that factor for investment in the future must be factored into the cost of what you're making now. We need to pay for the seatbelt, and we need to raise resources.
Right. I think it's very important that you brought in this analogy of a seat belt. Quite often we put preventive on the back burner, but very interestingly, I suppose your initial remarks are already made our audience curious, and we have Santosh. I think he wants to come in with a question. So do we have him as a phone in, or would he like to come through the chat? And I think do let me know when Santosh is ready with his question. But Professor Vijayaraghavan, I also wanted to ask this particular issue, that what we are now seeing is a what I can describe as shrinking physical and expanding digital. And I think that is where the issue of new knowledge, new technologies, and coordination comes in very much. Because in the aftermath of this pandemic, you would notice that people would have brought down their physical requirements to, to a very manageable extent, either out of a sense of precaution or even on account of of the perceived economic constraints. But there will be a layer of digital which will then permeate all our lives. And in the field of education, it will be in the field of communication, it will be in the field of entertainment. So how do we then get our large populace to cope with this, and particularly given your familiarity with the education world, how do you see this happening, particularly in the school system and then also in the college and higher learning system? So let's begin with the education, because I think that's what many of our I think listeners will be curious about.
Well, I think this point about education is a very important one. And the principal challenge is that the structure of people getting jobs had already changed dramatically before the pandemic.
Yeah.
The kinds of skilling which were required had changed dramatically. And it has changed even more for the reasons we have seen after the pandemic. Fundamentally, they go to three components. Before the pandemic, what was happening was, in general, jobs which involved low skills, middle level skills, or even high skills were steadily going back to sites closer to where customers were. This is because of what is called Industry 4.0. Manufacturing could be located where markets were there rather than at remote places because of labor arbitrage. So labor arbitrage was going to be destroyed, and therefore reskilling was needed. The second revolution which was taking place, and this was a consequence of the first, was that the products which were sold to markets, such as in India, were largely a combination of cyber and physical markets. In other words, not necessarily by direct link. You're told where it's available, you're told where it's cheap by other big companies. So in other words, your decision-making capacity has also been farmed off to someone else. These two situations pose an enormous challenge to our education. We need to now reformat our education so that kids everywhere in the country, whether they are in rural areas or urban areas, have an education. And this is not easy. This is not easy because it is not just about technology getting live streaming there, but it's about content and delivery of content. And the internet and other forms of content reach only a very small, other forms of delivery systems reach only a very small number of people. So we need to bring in television in a big way, but we also need to bring content in multiple languages. And that content will include now digital tools, learning coding, so that you are also your own, ruler in terms of decision making. And these kinds of digital dependent decision making are not left to others. This will, I think, result in a resurgence of both digital and physical kind of jobs which are tailored to our context, and more on that later.
Yeah, great. You brought this up, issue of television also. I would say even community radio could be a useful thing, particularly when we will be talking about flipped class systems. But I think we have Santosh ready. So can Santosh be taken, brought live? Hi, Santosh. Please ask your question.
Yes, sir. A very good evening. Amol, thanks a lot. So yeah, my question is, what are the strategies that India is taking regarding towards this is different compared to the rest of the countries in the world?
Okay, so if I understand you correctly, you are asking what is it that we are doing differently rather than doing more of the same. So I think Professor Vijay Raghavan, that's squarely in your domain.
I didn't hear the question fully, but I presume it's about what we're doing differently in terms of the pandemic. So I'll answer that. That is the case. Okay, good. Now, as the disease started spreading, we had very little knowledge on what to do, and we had to guess in terms of our understanding of the fundamental biology of the virus and how we had dealt with other pandemics. So those who are involved in decision making in the countries which were hit first, the Wuhan province of China, the rest of China, Korea, Italy, Spain, these people had a really tough time in deciding what was most effective. China took a stand which was extraordinarily considered extraordinarily infeasible in other locations. They completely blocked off Wuhan from the rest of the country, and that resulted in really crushing the spread of the pandemic to the rest of China. However, they were late in stopping people from flying out of Wuhan to all parts of the world, and that resulted in the spread all over the world. India was one of the earliest to lock down on international travelers coming in. That was very good, and India's monitoring was very good. So India did that, something which was done well and special. Later on, India has had an enormous challenge because, India's population is sort of a combination of all of Europe, Argentina, all of America. This is a huge population, and its diversity is just incredible. And therefore, to talk about Indian response and Indian metrics without breaking it up into components will not be correct. Now, India did well in the lockdown period by building up capacity, and that was very good. It's pretty incredible to see how our healthcare capacity was built up during the lockdown. Now, and another thing which India did, which was very good, which was unlike other countries, India advocated the use of masks and distancing much more robustly than many other countries. The result of this post-lockdown, what we are seeing now, is interesting. We are seeing, spikes in many major cities. These will spread to rural areas and to smaller towns, and there will be big challenges. But what is unusual about India, which needs investigation, is our death rate, our case fatality rate is very low. Now, this, I think, is a combination of two things. One, our much younger demography, but also a combination of our ability to learn on the job, which is a very good capability of Indian medics and Indian medical researchers, so that the treatment of people with extreme morbidities is very good. So the death rate is much lower than expected elsewhere. So I think India has done, in very difficult situations, a very creditable job.
Santosh, I suppose that does address your question. I hope you are satisfied with this. I would also request other audience to come in, particularly our younger friends who are listening to this. But I think I will take Professor Vijay Raghavan to a slightly different track. I mean, he mentioned about the e-marketing part of it. I'm taking you to the economy because that's another issue of great concern, particularly to a lot of younger people. And with apologies to the original Shire, I would say, कोरोना से आगे जहां और भी हैं, अभी economy के इम्तिहान और भी हैं. And it is the economy का इम्तिहान which is something where we need to come out with flying colors. So when you talked about this whole issue of e-marketing, I mean, it seems a little contradictory, but can one bring Gandhi in and say that this whole idea of mass production versus production by masses? So can we now probably look at this production by masses at different nodes with good quality control and quality assurance courtesy technology, and then going for a digital marketing, which probably may be a very efficient way of benefiting the primary producer on one hand and the consumer on the other hand. So, I mean, it's a slightly futuristic thought, but I would love to have your reaction on this.
You know, there are two kinds of answers to this. And one I would call the 19th and 20th century answer. This involved the broad prevalence of unskilled labor to do quality work. In other words, people were involved in the production of wealth, but did not necessarily understand the science and engineering beyond their production. And this has been true for millennia. You know, whenever people made tools, they don't necessarily, you know, tens of thousands of years ago, didn't necessarily have to know the physics or the engineering beyond those tools. But today's science and technology is very different. Let me give you two examples. One, people of my age group, Hari and others, when we were growing up, when cricket matches were going on, everyone used to walk around with a transistor radio held towards the ear. This little transistor radio, if you opened it up, you would find a printed circuit board over there in which there were transistors, capacitors, resistors, and so on. These were typically assembled in different villages in India, and women used to put in resistors, and next village used to put in capacitors, another village used to solder everything, and these boards were assembled and then done. So this was high tech of that time, assembled by people who did not understand the electronics behind it. Now that in some ways is still feasible now, is redoable.
I think we have lost Professor Vijay Raghavan for a while.
I'll come back.
Yeah. Okay, great.
But
yeah.
Where did you lose me? Do you remember?
Yeah. We just lost you when you said that this is still feasible today, but and then.
Okay. So it's feasible today to bring back, but this requires a different kind of skilling. The availability of power, renewable energy, for example, in every place is one tool. The other is the power transistor revolution has allowed machines to be accessible with low voltage DC.
Absolutely.
These two means that new kinds of manufacturing can be done locally, and that means all you need is high quality roads and infrastructure to deliver these products. But this requires extraordinary training and skilling. This is no longer merely putting in parts and assembling it. This requires a lot higher level of understanding. So education there is very, very important. The next component is internet connectivity. As that spreads, you have the ability to design, whether it is your textile or your paintings or electronics. Local design can be done and copyrighted or patented and exported on the internet to multiple other locations, thereby earning income. So design of machinery, design of every component is one way to do it.
Yeah, but Professor Vijay Raghavan, I think this is one thing which a lot of people are saying, and one of our audience, George Varghese, is asking this question, that manufacturing is the backbone of the economy, however much digital sets its foot in. And in fact, one of the poets, I remember, he said, "Aap jitna bhi digital kar le, lekin roti Google se download nahi hoti, wo to banani padti hai." So it's in the same spirit. But then how do you see this happening in the new normal? And that's exactly where I was bringing this whole issue of a production by masses with QC/QA, and then the marketing or aggregation or movements could be digitally handled. Will that be a feasible way? Because given the IT firepower that we have today in India, that seems to be feasible. So how would you react to George Varghese's question?
I completely agree that not all manufacturing can be local. But the tools of manufacturing are changing. That a substantial part of manufacturing can be local, and designs can be imported or exported, so that computer-aided design linked with manufacturing instruments allow local manufacturing of components and distribution. This is one way, one component. I'm not sure it'll be all pervasive, and I'm not sure it'll be all pervasive very soon, but that is one kind of economy which is there. I was visiting Bharat Forge a year ago, and I saw their jet engine design department. And they were designing high-end jet engines, small jet engines, and they were designing those and manufacturing them by subtractive manufacturing. The design was all precisely done, every component of the material was known, and they manufactured an engine. And then what did they do? They exported hundreds of engines to Germany. How did they export it? Not one engine left Pune. They exported every detail of the design, including how every machine was to be computer controlled and functioned, to their German collaborators, who then manufactured it there and did, instead of manufacturing 5, manufactured 500. So in other words, the design is going to be, whether it's semiconductor design or jet engine design or textile design, design is going to be at a premium. You need to have the ability to manufacture some extent locally, but instrumentation distributed can allow scaling up of manufacturing, and the greatest profit and the greatest value will come from thought. And therefore, our education should be focused on thought, logical thinking, and training to excel in design.
I think that's very well put, because it essentially says that, for the sake of manufacturing, you don't have to do either or between the manufacturing and the digital. In fact, the trick is to bring the Shastri and the Mistri together. And in some sense, when Hari was referring to the Jharkhand initiative of PanIIT, that's something which they are trying to do, which the next session will take up. But I think George's question related to manufacturing has triggered a curiosity from some of the startups, and we have Kaushik Chakravarti. He's asking us, how do you see the startups working in the healthcare domain performing post-COVID? And I think this is very important, that it also links up with some of the initiatives from your office and the Department of Science and Technology. So what would be your message for the young startups, particularly in the health sector? And I would add to Kaushik's question about the preventive aspects of the healthcare. Where is the role or scope for the startups there?
Okay, now this is a very exciting and important question. And this, one needs to learn from what we have been doing recently in some sectors extraordinarily successfully, and how potentially that can be scaled up to the healthcare sector. Now look at the financial sector. India's finance stack, the IT stack, the universal payments system, riding on that, several payment platforms have come, and the Reserve Bank, the Finance Ministry, and these platforms have worked extraordinarily well. In a similar manner, we need to make sure that our health stack also functions so that health can be delivered to all. So we need a government-supported, regulated, quality backbone on which multiple players of different kinds, multiple kinds of health systems, from Ayurveda to allopathy and others can come in. But, you have different ways of delivering health services, both preventive, maternal and child care, to each and every person. This person has a health ID, so that no matter whether you're rich or poor, with that ID, your health records can come with your privacy protected, up to you. Whether you're rich or poor or wherever you go, you have access to your information, and this needs to be done. And this is amazingly, eminently doable today by the Indian IT industry. In a similar way, what you can do for health, you can do for agriculture, you can do for livestock. And this is what we must do with passion, because this allows us to integrate government programs which are huge, which have a lot of infrastructure in it, with private programs which are nimble, but we must also have a regulatory system so that the private program and the government program can partner for public good.
Going forward and still staying on Kaushik's question, do you see a huge role for startups in the field of telemedicine? Because I think today, courtesy the current crisis, a lot of medical professionals and even the patients have switched over to the equivalent of a majburi ka telemedicine, but can that majburi ka telemedicine be converted into adat ka telemedicine? You know, that becomes the new norm. Do you see a role of startup, and is your office or one of the scientific departments pushing it in a way, or you see any role of any of the IITs in it, or PanIIT in it?
All of the above. Let me come to that for a little later after I tell you. I mean, Chandra from Tata Sons has written a book called The Digital Nation, about bridging the digital with these kinds of services. And reading that book, you'll get a set of examples which are extraordinary about how being digital doesn't have to be distant from people, because you have people who are bridges from the digital to the real world. And this can be done for telemedicine, and there's an enormous room for startups, for medicine delivery, and for all sorts of other human related, societal related services today. So this is going to happen increasingly, and this COVID pandemic is a wake-up call to do that. Before this, we were in a mood that every time we wanted to do something on telemedicine or on e-methods of delivery, we were warned about data storage and how it could be misused and so on and so forth. And those parameters have been addressed really well now, and they have been addressed well in the financial sector, and they need to be ported over here. But remember that the real world as it stands today is even more fraught with all these kinds of problems in terms of access by the poorest to medical care. And therefore, we must have telemedicine, but do it in a manner where this digital is there, so that those without access to the tele resources can still have care. And that is eminently feasible today. And I won't spend too much more time on it, but I should say today in radiology, for example, there are private hospitals in India who are catering to radiology analysis in Indonesia and Malaysia on an enormous scale. Now, this is being catered to in the poorest areas in Indonesia. And therefore, our hospitals already have experience because of the legal system allowing them to do that. If we open up our internal structures, which we are doing now, I think high-end healthcare and preventive care will reach many parts of India. And I'm sure this will happen soon.
I think, Kaushik, you have a twin task. Professor Vijayaraghavan, going back to his IIT days, has given you a reading assignment. And in his current role as a PSA, he has given you an aspiration to look to. So I'm sure you will be able to do justice with both. But we also have a question from Loirego. He says, how will pandemic preparedness be expanded and institutionalized in India, drawing upon our experience of COVID-19? I think that's important issue, because we can't treat it as a one-off or ye chala gaya to chutkare ki saas chhod diya and go back to business as usual. But so how do you visualize this getting institutionalized? And I think there the role of technology or the role of scientific departments becomes very, very crucial. So would you like to respond to this question?
Well, the answer is, doable. I'll give you two quick examples. One, if you look at the tsunami of about over 10 years ago, Earth Sciences put in a tsunami early warning system across our seas, so that we will have definite warning. If there's a tsunami in Indonesia, we'll have a 6-minute warning to clear our coasts. The warning system is there in our coast. Tsunami training has been given to all our coastal areas. Everyone is ready, and they practice that every time. Similarly for earthquake warning. Therefore, it is feasible. Now, this pandemic warning is different, because Each disease is different. Yet, there are simple measures which can be taken no matter what the disease is. South Korea learned from the SARS coronavirus 1 and the MERS epidemics, and they have a system by which when there's a hint of an epidemic, then masks, social distancing, hygiene kicks in at high level. And everyone has to follow that. And they have a testing and tracking mechanism. We now have the Arogya Setu app, which allows testing, tracking, and isolation that has privacy and security completely protected. But South Korea, every phone call which anyone makes is tracked.
Yeah, I suppose, yes.
Every credit card is tracked, and then people are isolated. So these kinds of measures, agnostic to which pandemic is there, is something which can be done. Other things are needed. Deep investment in ecological sciences, environmental sciences, and in public health. Cleaning up our environment is very important. Our big trash areas, sewage, all of that needs to be cleaned. So these are measures which will protect us for any pandemic.
So I suppose, Loy, I think the short answer is that once the doability gets established, I think the institutionalization will follow. I think that's probably the right way to go about it. And in fact, I would recall the old song, that Hindi song that we used to hear, and it goes something like कि दूरियां नजदीकियां बन गई अजब इत्तेफाक है. Now see the way we conduct these meetings itself, it has made that song look like very true. Earlier we would not have thought about it. So that's a important issue. I think Professor Vijayanathan, I'll bring you back to that original issue that we had started with, where I had mentioned that how do we horizontally spread this cooperation. And I'll just give an example that in the field of giving massive employment, NREGA, government has increased its budget to almost 1 lakh crore. There's a huge scope for bringing in technological inputs, increasing the productivity, doing things more differently. So is there any horizontal coordination that is being initiated from your office? I mean, I already know that you have a call for agri-technologies, but similar current programs of NREGA or NRLM, are we looking for your office working as a bridge between the technology departments and the user departments like MORD or Ministry of Health or the Ministry of even Social Justice and Empowerment? The user departments could probably be able to utilize their money much better with the infusion of technology. So could you...
So the cabinet has formed an empowered technology group, which I chair as the principal scientific advisor. Its purpose is exactly this: to have integrated technology officers in each department and work with them to do all of what you said. And that's a big push which we're doing. Secondly, there are multiple missions. For example, that Har Nal Se Jal, the water mission, for example, both in terms of supply and demand, the waste to wealth efforts, you mentioned the MNREGA and several other programs. Now, there are two aspects to those programs. One, which is a very important and essential aspect for those who are, very, very poor, and that is to essentially deliver resources in a manner which they can pull themselves up and go to the next level. And that should not be compromised. That's very, very important. But there's another level, in addition to that, in which there should be a mechanism by which technology is used and enabled so that it can be used by them to further go to the next level. So it's not sufficient to give quote-unquote employment, but employment must be coupled with training in a significant manner. To do that, it is very important our institutions, our IITs, for example, be connected to the local environment. My favorite statement about many of our best institutions, IIT Kanpur, where I am from, is an example, is that these are extraordinary places, but they're a short walk from India. IIT Kanpur has very little to do with Kalyanpur next door. Now, of course, one can exhort IIT Kanpur and say you must understand Kalyanpur and its problems. But that needs to be an organic relationship and not something which is forced. Today, technology of various kinds, the miniaturization of technology, and the link of technology to economic growth allows institutions to open up their walls, interact with local societies, with farmers, with self-help groups, with rural areas, with women organizations. This requires institutions to convert a part of their hard drive, partition it for this interaction purpose. You can have your algebraic geometer, you can have your nanotechnologists. They don't necessarily have to do this. But there is a partitioned hard drive in clusters of institutions working together in every city, whose job is to have a setup which interacts with industry, which interacts with society, interacts with our environment. That is feasible, and that's what our office is trying to do in these city clusters and linking them to the rest of our area.
Oh, that's really very well put. And sorry, I think your responses bring back to mind a lot of old Hindi songs, and I now remember the one which says, "आ अब लौट चले, नैना बिछाए, बाहें पसारे, तुझको पुकारे देश तेरा." So I think probably for IITs or PanIIT, this particular call, कि तुझको पुकारे देश तेरा, is something which we need to heed to. I think that is something which the next session will. Yeah.
If I may add one point to that, and that's something incredible about this alumni group. 30 years ago or 40 years ago, IIT alumni were young people who wanted to succeed and make it big. And to exhort them to connect with people and society when they themselves had to liberate themselves was a challenge. Today, the pool of people is very large and the pool of successful people is very large. So even if a small fraction of these successful people, as is happening already, if they now move from worrying about themselves to worrying about the country, extraordinary transformations will happen. And the PanIIT group, the Global IIT Alumni, is doing just that. So there are different times for different things for different people. Everyone doesn't have to do the same thing all the time, but the organization should, have a major effect on the country and its economy and its society. That's eminently feasible. So that's, I think, wonderful to see.
Oh, that's very well put. I think, thank you for your endorsement. I think it's time for us to wind up our part of the conversation. I'll remind everybody of the famous Hindi writer Kamleshwar. And Kamleshwar used to say कि अहमियत इस बात की नहीं है कि आप कहाँ हैं. It's not so much material where you are. अहमियत इस बात की है कि आप जहाँ हैं वहाँ क्या कर रहे हैं. So I think this is a lesson which all of us have to take in our lives. And as far as Professor Vijay Raghavan is concerned, वो जहाँ हैं वहाँ वो बहुत कुछ कर रहे हैं, and everybody is seeing it. And I'm sure the PanIIT will also be, the Reach for India program will take inspiration from you. And certainly we will take this particular task forward. So I think we are now very close to our conversation. There's just one last question which is there. So with the permission of the organizers, I'll just mention this. It says COVID has given an opportunity to improve our basic health and education sector. What is GoI response to take this up? And this is Tarun Shukla has asked. Before I give it to Professor Vijay Raghavan, I may remind our audience also that health, nutrition and education, a certain amount of expenditure on it was made mandatory under CSR for public sector by government very recently. So government is alive to this fact that these three hang together. The improvement in both, when you say health, I take it that health and nutrition is together, and education. So that is something which will be an effort to which probably the institutes of higher learning may contribute in terms of bringing knowledge. I suppose, Professor Vijayaraghavan, that's the view which we all
Yeah, absolutely.
agree.
I would just add a couple of points to that. Increasing expenditure in these areas, of course, is very important. There are always multiple different kinds of pulls. But also the efficiency of the investment needs to be looked at, and we need to invest in
I'm afraid that investment question probably the net didn't like, so we lost.
sorry. So we must make the efficiency of our investment high, so that while we increase investment, we also have greater bang for the buck. I'd like to also, use this opportunity to say how much teams within my office are working with all arms of the government, with organizations such as the PanIIT Global Alumni, with other organizations, to make this a shared sense of purpose, so that we are very effective in all that we do, and with the government, of course, including the state government.
Thank you, Professor Vijayaraghavan. It was wonderful talking to you. I also learned a few things, and I'm sure our audience would have benefited. We have questions, but unfortunately, I think there are constraints of time. I'm not a regular anchor, but I can also say abhi ek break ka time ho gaya. So thank you very much, and thank you Hari, for your initial anchoring, and Professor Vijayaraghavan.
Thank you all, and thank you, Hari. Yeah. Bye bye.